The Marvel Snap Infinite climb can be one of the most infuriating experiences for those of us crazy enough to try to attain it every season. I've got a lot of friends that are constantly frustrated, usually stuck around the 80 mark going, man, I want to hit Infinite and I just don't know how to get there. Well, I want to ease that pain a little bit. I was finally able to do it for the first time myself this season. It was a very long grind throughout the month, and I want to share the decks that got me there before we go through the season reset and we start playing some new ones. I do have some pretty strong cards in here. I know there's people that got giant collection levels bigger than this. I'm sitting at around 3,479 right now. Gonna try to hit 4K some point between the next month, but I wanted to share a lot of the decks that got me here. I'm using generally 5 in total that facilitated most of my cube gain to get me to Infinite. The first one being Mr. Negative. This was actually a big proponent of my climb and ladder this season. Got me from about rank 30 where I started this season, pretty rough, all the way up to about like 88 before it stopped working for me. There are some pretty strong cards in here with Bast and Valkyrie, but they're easy to replace if you want to go for some more budget versions. Once you have Mr. Negative and a good mix of cards, you can essentially run this deck. Negative is the main proponent of this deck. He swaps the power and cost of all cards in your deck. I mean, most of you know how Negative works, making them net about twice the amount of value they'd have originally. Zabu is in here to curve Mr. Negative out faster on turn 3, thereby dropping him as fast as we can to maximize the amount of cards that get hit with his effect. And then we're dropping big boys like Iron Man, who becomes a 0-5, essentially turning himself into a 0-10 drop with his own effect, along with Mystique, who becomes a 0-3. Your dream curve is essentially to hit, let's say like Boss turn 1, since she's the, Boss is the only one cost you could play anyway. Zabu on turn 2, Mr. Negative on turn 3, opening with all of them in hand. Mr. Negative also at that point becomes a 4-3 because of Boss. And then you draw into Iron Man and Mystique, who you hope to not have in your opening hand, and every single other card in the game just facilitates their ability to use their multiplication effect to net you incredible value on lanes that your opponent just won't be able to contest with. Valkyrie and Nakia along with Boss are all in here as backup plans to not drawing into your curve the exact way that you want. Iron Man and Mystique can feel a lot less strong when you don't have their added value, and they gain that from both Boss, Nakia, and Valkyrie. Whether you play Valkyrie in a lane along with one of them to essentially, let's say like Mystique, you can, if Valkyrie becomes a 3 cost by the Mr. Negative flip, you can play Mystique turn 6 following up your Iron Man, and then play Valkyrie in that same lane, then turning Mystique into a 3-3 and still netting her some increased value. Nakia's even stronger depending on what cards are left most in your hand. She drops as a 2-3 herself, which is good enough as a multiplier. Again, she turns into a 2-6, but she also you can work out turns where you say play Boss turn 1, hit Negative, or you play Boss in hand. Boss hits Bishop, Bishop becomes a 3-3, Nakia hits Bishop, Bishop becomes a 3-5, and then you play Bishop out, already a lot stronger than he was originally intended to be, and then it's just the nuts. They really can't beat it. If you don't have Boss and Valkyrie, there's a lot of decent replacement options. I would say Arnim Zola gonna be one of the stronger ones here, coming out at a 6-0. He becomes a 0-6, and then can hit a solo lane to Iron Man and send him to 2 other lanes. You could also turn this into a pseudo Devil Dinosaur engine, with the inclusion of Dino, who becomes a 3-5. You end up following him with Mystique also. And then you can throw in cards like Adam Warlock, who becomes a 0-2 and still nets you those draws, drawing you into your curve faster. He sometimes can feel a little wishy-washy, which is why in this final version I'm not playing him to the same value. Cards like Wolfsbane do really great in here. Cards like White Tiger do really good in here. Wong turns into a 2-4 and can make Ironheart a beast of a card if you end up doing Wong, Mystique, Ironheart and just buffing your board to insane levels of value. Sometimes that can't be stopped. I do think Magic in here is the biggest non-negotiable. You need Magic if you don't draw into curve, or else you can't buy time. She is also weak, of course, to cards like Reality Stone, Scarlet Witch, Storm, who can essentially shut down that extra turn that you need and then beat you early. A lot of times you want to make sure that if you make a turn 6 play, that you still think there's the potential that that play could win if your opponent is going to use power to shut down your limbo lane that's created by Magic. But all in all, this was an incredibly strong deck for me this season. I'm going to make an updated video because I've made one on Negative before. I'll link it in the top right corner. This is my new updated, as optimized as I can make Mr. Negative in my own mind version of this build. And I think if you have the ability to play it, you should try to. Next one was one of the more for fun decks, which ends up being this Deadpool Destroy build. This one is pretty standard as far as I'm concerned. You could get a little more creative with it. You could throw like a Shuri Nimrod engine in here and then try to work that out. That ends up becoming more of a destroy your deck. I kind of like the fun of this deck. For me is really just trying to see how big I can make this Deadpool and just slap a nice 16 power chimichanga on my opponent that gets followed up by Taskmaster last turn, especially because Deadpool's a 1-drop. It almost essentially acts kind of like a Shuri deck if you get the setup as far as your end game play, because you're just dropping a big stack card followed up by Taskmaster a lot of the time. You know, you're generally, again, going to use cards like the Hood. Boss is good in everything. You don't need Boss in here. Again, you could slot a card like Shuri in just to make that Deadpool even bigger on turn 5 and then just go nuts with it turn 6. You could throw Zola in here, essentially anything that gets destroyed. You can kind of fit in Death. I think the reason I like this build is when I try to throw bigger stat cards in here, they end up feeling like they just clog my hand from the bigger plays that I want to make, which is just hitting Deadpool as many times as we can and using Bucky Barnes, of course, as a priority tool to make sure we get those destroy plays off first. It struggles against generally everything that destroy decks struggle against, right? If they armor you, if they Cosmo in the right lane, they're going to be problematic. So you want to try to build priority with this deck because you can throw it a lot of the times on your final turn anyway by taking that big power Deadpool back. Your opponent goes off first, and then they generally can't stop the Taskmaster play if they don't have the right setup. Doubly so if they played like a Cosmo or an Armor early on in the game. You play Deadpool in whatever lane is protected, and then you play Taskmaster in the other lane so he gains that power. And if they can't stop it, they can't stop it, and you just pop off. It's a very, very fun deck. But you have to be very strict with your cube management because it's not a very strong deck. It's very entertaining. I'm sure a lot of us have decks like this. Very, very fun, but you've got to be very strict about your cube management. When you draw the nuts, snap. When you don't. Deck number 3 is my second favorite deck to play outside of Mr. Negative, which is going to be this Devil Ronin deck. Now, I am waiting on posting a video about this one because I need Master Mold. If I get Master Mold and Darkhawk, oh, this deck becomes so much better. But in their absence, this is the budget version I've been running to want to try to facilitate similar strategy plays without having the big nuts cards in Darkhawk and Master Mold. Iceman, Korg, Baron Mordo, all big. Baron Mordo quite arguably being my favorite in here. All deterrents. Just big hand disruption to shut down plays that your opponent wanted to make. I will say this, if you play this deck and you see Kamar-Taj, oh, it is party city. You Iceman their hand twice, you give them 2 rocks, you make them draw 2 cards that cost 6. Then, if you can get away with it, you place all of those cards in the same lane, you beast them back to your hand, you do it all over again. If they don't end up retreating straight from the frustration because they think they still have a little secret play, your Ronin the Accuser gets so big, gaining +2 power for every card they have in their hand, and we're essentially just flooding their hands with cards that they can't dump because we're increasing the cost of everything that they have, making them draw rocks that are useless. So even if they do dump a card down, the net value they get on board versus what our Ronin becomes is so in our favor when this deck is working out. And then you essentially, the dream is, fill their hands with cards that they can't get down. You play Ronin on turn 5, you follow him up with Mystique on turn 6, taking his effect. You follow her up with Maximus on turn 6. As your 3/3 play, Mystique gains the Ronin effect. Maximus drops as a big fat 3/7. They draw 2 more cards, and you don't really care what those cards are because they played their hand already. They're done. You just do what you want. Moon Girl can get you double Mystiques or double Ronins. Quinjet will make them cheaper to play out, so you can essentially make every single lane powerful. It's one of my favorite parts about this deck is your ability to redistribute that power so that your opponent has to shut down all 3 lanes essentially to stop you, and when they're unable to do it, they have to just leave. Again, even if they want to do that, there's a chance, let's say they have a Shang-Chi, you might have made them unable to play Shang-Chi. If they want to play Shang-Chi, he's the only card they could play for that turn. If they can't Shang-Chi 3 lanes, they don't take the game. Now, sometimes you fight like a discard deck or something where you can't really control how many cards they have in that hand. That's why there's a Devil Dinosaur engine in here as a backup win condition. You don't want to get counterpicked that heavily, so having Moon Girl, White Queen for information. I mean, she's quite arguably to me the best information card in the game, second to Daredevil. Moon Girl, White Queen, Devil Dinosaur essentially acts like that engine on their own. You Quinjet, you Moon Girl, you Dino. You end up doing the same play anyway. If they can stop Ronin, sometimes they can't stop Devil Dinosaur, and you win the game anyway. It's a very, very strong deck. And again, second favorite currently in the game to play. When I get Darkhawk and Master Mold, will probably be my actual favorite deck. I'm going to talk about Shuri now because I don't want to do that YouTuber thing to you where I just bring up the most meta deck in the game last and end on that note. I mean, we're going to be following this with a pretty meta deck anyway, a little more budget version, but Shuri's a very strong deck for a very good reason. It's ridiculous. You maintain priority the whole game, and a lot of times your opponent can't stop you. This is a great counter to Galactus decks, I love, with the inclusion of both Cosmo and Arrow, essentially, to shut down their plays as long as you maintain priority. There is an inkling with some players that I've met that play this Shuri deck and think that the secret is that you want to throw priority. That is not the case. You want to maintain priority as much as you can so that your armor goes off first, your Cosmo goes off first, your Red Skull goes off first. All of your cards can be protected and set up because you dictate the pace of the game because you're always going first. We obviously know that the big play is Shuri in this deck, doubling the power of the next card that we play, and we have a lot of big cards at the end to do that, between Red Skull, She-Hulk, even Captain Marvel, who's a great engine in this game. One of the biggest problems with Shuri decks is being too big to get into other lanes. You get Goosed, you can't deal with Goose. You get Captain Plunder, and you don't have the stats to play into that lane because you needed to float She-Hulk for a big turn. Captain Marvel is an answer to all of those lanes you normally can't get into. And Shuri just makes these cards so big that you can't stop them, as well as Taskmaster following them up and Dyson sucking up their power with a combination of like Red Skull. Even with his nerf, you drop a 526 that they can't contest with, and then you drop a 526 that they can't contest with. If you don't do that, you float on turn 5, so She-Hulk becomes a 1 cost. So you play Shuri, you float turn 5, then you drop She-Hulk as an 18 power, you drop Taskmaster, he copies She-Hulk's power. And the curve in the beginning is very simple. You're looking at Sunspot, Armor, Cosmo, Shuri, big 5 cost, Taskmaster plus a 1 cost, or Shuri, float, She-Hulk, Taskmaster, or Shuri, float, She-Hulk, Arrow on lanes that you're going to win anyway. Your end game options are so strong. You sometimes don't mind getting leeched. Once Shuri goes off, doubly so if Taskmaster is not in your hand, you just drop a big fat boy, and then the next turn you drop another one in a 1 cost, so leech isn't really the biggest problem for you in this deck. Again, maintaining priority means you shut down Galactus decks. You can compete with the power of Thanos decks. You don't care about Electro Ramp because you can outpower them as well. You're only playing 1 card per turn anyway. You just focus on building up the power in the 2 lanes that you need, and you make sure your cards are protected so you can't get Shang-Chi, which again is going to get stopped by the combination of Armor and Cosmo. If, for whatever reason, you don't have priority on the last turn, Titania becomes even better because you don't have to worry about her board flipping. You either shut it down with Zero. You're generally a lot of the times going to be using Zero to either target Titania or Lizard, but you don't need to hit Titania. If you go second, you play your big 5 cost, you play Titania after that, and she's an extra 5 power wherever she goes. This deck is a little weak to Killmonger in lanes where your 1 costs are not protected by armor, so you want to be careful about your power distribution with your 1 cost. Make sure that it's not something you're reliant on to win a lane if you're playing a deck that can be running Killmonger because they can't shut you down. So generally you want to make sure that those cards are armored, or if they do have space to play a Killmonger, that you can Cosmo that lane before they can get to it and shut down the play. But this is one of the best decks in the game for good reason. It's because it works. Our last slightly more budget version of a similar strategy deck is going to be Doom Wave. Now, there's a couple of different Wave strategy decks. Essentially, Wave and She-Hulk is one of the best combos in the game if your opponent is not also running a card that reduces their own cost, which is really, from what I can picture, really just She-Hulk and Death, which is why Death Wave is a thing, and that's why Doom Wave is a thing. The entire idea with this deck, similar to Shuri decks, but not with the same curve essentially, is that you're going to drop a lot of your 1 cost early to maintain priority. You're looking to solely play Wave on turn 5, then floating 2 power to She-Hulk, who will go down to a 4 cost and then reduce by another 2 to turn into a 2 cost, allowing you to play her and another big bad on the last turn, either Arrow, Chavez, or Doom. Essentially, you're going to build a priority that's so strong on certain lanes that Doom ends up being a great facilitator for just a win condition because you drop that 5 power in every single lane. Your opponent, limited to only playing 1 card, can't necessarily stop him. And if you play Doom last, you don't care about getting arrowed because Arrow pulls him wherever, and then the same thing happens anyway. So you just want to make sure that you build up a lot of priority and you essentially set up a lane that it can't be beat with any card, and then you just win 3 lanes with Wave turn 5, She-Hulk followed by Doom, and I essentially would always play them in that order just to make sure that She-Hulk doesn't get arrowed. You still have control over the board. It's the same thing with the Arrow nerf. I think even with the nerf, Arrow is still one of the best tech cards in the game. Your opponent can play her to stop you, but you can also do the same thing because you're running her too. Maybe instead of She-Hulk Doom, you play She-Hulk Arrow, you suck one of their cards away, and you win lanes like that anyway. It's really strong. And Polaris is a great card in here. 1 for priority and 2 for her combo disruption. If you're playing a Shuri deck and they armor a lane, there's a chance that Polaris pulls that armor away. Now the Sunspot's weak. Now the Red Skull's exposed. There's been big plays with this too. I have won games in this deck thanks to the Shang-Chi tech by using Polaris to pull armor away, who in some games is the only 1 to 2 cost on the board, and then Shang-Chiing that lane and getting a surprise win from them that way. There's a lot of different versatility with this, but you make their cards weaker, you're stronger, and then you give them the ability to only play 1 strong card in end turn while you play 2 for free, and they can't stop you. But with that said, that's every single deck that I use personally to attain Infinite this season. I hope you guys enjoy the videos. I'm going to be dropping a lot more soon. I'm actually spending all today trying to edit like 7 videos to get it for you guys. So if you have any decks that you'd like to see, some ideas you have for me, or critiques on how annoying it is that I played Shuri to climb some ranks, okay? I used it for like 5. Give me a break. Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Much love as always. Keep playing Marvel Snap, and I'll see you around. Peace.